In part 1 of this discussion, I showed how to create a global variable. Simply declare it outside of any function. I also urged you to start your global variables with capital letters, so they'll be easy to distinguish from local variables, which start with lowercase letters. Here's our background drawing program where we left it at the end of part 1. Suppose that we want redval to change over time. When we start the program, processing reads everything through. It looks at void setup. It says, okay, once I start running the code, I'm going to begin here. It keeps going. It says, oh, I need 3 floating point variables, red val, green val, blue val. It makes them. It puts the initial values into them. It keeps reading. It sees draw, finishes everything else if there's more. And then it starts the program by calling setup. So the global variables are created and initialized before anything else happens. So the way to think of this program is, even though we've put the declarations and assignments for red val, green val, and blue val in the middle, if we were thinking of the program kind of running from the top of the screen to the bottom, they would belong at the top. They're the first thing that happens. Then setup gets executed, then draw. So the first time draw gets executed, red val has the value 255. Suppose we want the red value to go down on every frame. We want it to get steadily darker and darker. Well, we can just stick in a line. Red val minus equals, using our shortcut, red val equals red val minus 10. And now every time we come through, red val will be 10 less than it was before. And it retains that memory because red val doesn't belong to draw. It doesn't go away when draw is over. It doesn't get created when draw begins. It exists outside of draw. That's why we call these global variables. They are visible globally. They are visible to the world. So that's really the difference between local and global variables. In general, local variables are created within a pair of curly braces and are only available to code until the end of the curly brace in which they were defined. Global variables are declared outside of the curly braces, and they're available to everything. And also notice the indenting. Global variables are flush with the left margin. Local variables, although we don't have one declared here, are indented 1 tab stop. Here's a little program that we're going to use to take a look at global and local variables. So I'll tell you what, before we do anything else, let's just run it. And it creates a background with a circle that isn't moving. So let's see what the code is. Let's ignore the first couple of lines. First, we have a void setup, size and smooth, old friends. Inside of void draw, I call background, I fill, and then I draw an ellipse. And the ellipse is centered at center X, center Y, and it has a width and a height of 50. So this is our clue that these are global variables because they both begin with capital C. Capital C center X, capital C center Y, and when we look around, sure enough, there they are up at the top. So every time draw gets called, it draws the same ellipse at the same center X and center Y. So tell you what, let's have center X and center Y change from one frame to the next. We could, of course, compute something using frame count and some math, but let's try it a different way. Let's let these global variables do something for us. Now, I could do something here. Center X equals whatever. But I'm thinking maybe this is going to get very complicated. Maybe I'm going to have this thing fly around in crazy ways, and I want to keep it out of draw. Conceptually, all I want to do is move the ellipse. And then draw doesn't have to worry about how it's done. It just says, okay, from one frame to the next, the ellipse has been moved. So let's write that function. Void move ellipse. I know it doesn't take any arguments. And tell you what, for the moment, let's not even do anything inside of move ellipse. Let's just run the program and make sure everything's right. Great. So now let's have move ellipse do something. And we'll just have it push the ellipse to the right by 1.5 units every frame and push it down 1 unit every frame. Remember, in this case, center Y plus equals 1 is a shortcut for center Y equals center Y plus 1. And same thing for center X. So let's run this program. Great. Now we could have done that with frame count, but we did it this way, and the advantage here is All draw has to do is call MoveEllipse. And so conceptually, things are very nice. When we go to debug this, when we come to understand it, it's very clear that draw is just doing some simple stuff. Drawing the background, choosing a color, and drawing an ellipse, and then it calls MoveEllipse. And MoveEllipse is responsible for whatever it does, and this eventually could get huge and crazy. But draw doesn't care. Draw stays short, so we've partitioned our problem. Now I want to show you something really important, the reason for doing all of this. Suppose that I wasn't paying attention and I declared these variables in MoveEllipse. We know this is going to cause a problem, but suppose we didn't know that. First of all, there's one thing that should clue us that there's a problem, and that's that I'm declaring a local variable with a capital starting letter. And that violates my convention that only globals start with capitals, locals start with lowercase. But processing doesn't care. That's strictly our personal convention. It's perfectly happy to say, okay, I will make a local variable called center X, give it the value 50, make a local variable called center Y, give it the value 50, add 1.5 to the first one and 1 to the second one. So let's run this program, and nothing is happening. This can drive you absolutely crazy. And it will happen to you. It happens to everyone. And it's because as you work on your program, you copy, you paste, you move things around. A local variable becomes a global because you think you want to share it. Then later you say, no, I want to make it a local. You move it back in and you lose track at some point. And you end up declaring a global variable to be a local variable. And the problem is that they have the same name. The global is called center X and the local variable is called center X. As far as processing is concerned, this center X is local to MoveEllipse. It has absolutely nothing to do with the global because we are redeclaring it inside of MoveEllipse. I wish it didn't even let you do this. I wish that this was an error. And if you did this, you got an error message where processing said, you can't possibly mean this. You are declaring a local variable with the same name as a global. The local variable will hide the global. It won't pay attention to it. Any changes you make will be to the local variable, not the global. And I wish processing just said that is almost never what anybody ever wants. And I'm not even going to let you do it. But it does. Trying to debug this can drive you crazy because you'll look at draw and you'll say, I draw the background, I fill, I draw the ellipse, this all works, and then I call MoveEllipse. So your eye moves down to MoveEllipse, and maybe you really quickly look over the declarations, and then you look at center X and center Y, and you go, they're being updated. What's wrong? And eventually you will look again at these declarations and you'll see that they are local. One way to catch this problem is to print these things out. So I'll do this kind of thing. Center X equals, and then I'll print out center X. And I'll probably put them both on the same line. It looks like they can fit. Center Y equals center Y. And now if I run this, I get to see what X and Y are, and look at this. They're 51.5 and 51 always. They're never updating. So that's a clue that we're not using the global variables. We must be hiding them with local variables of the same name. And so my recommendation is never, ever have a local variable with the same name as a global, because it's almost not what you want and it will confuse you. In this video, we have seen that when you declare a variable, if it is within the curly braces of a function, it is local to that function and only exists, as far as processing is concerned, within that function. If it's outside of any curly braces, then it's global and it can be shared amongst all functions, and its value is retained as long as the program is running. And if you change the value, it remembers the changed value. This is incredibly helpful and incredibly useful. Anytime you find yourself wishing that a variable was shared amongst more than one function, or you wish that a variable retained its value across multiple frames, that's your signal to declare that variable as a global. Remember, give it a capital starting letter and you'll never get confused.